When do we officially declare that the Republican Party has killed America? I mean, this is, I think, one of the biggest questions facing America right now. Rudy Giuliani, it was learned yesterday as a result of this lawsuit from this woman that he just relentlessly was sexually assaulting, who was in his employ. She has sworn under oath and under penalty of perjury that he told her, first of all, he hired her to exploit business opportunities, to find business opportunities for his law firm. One of the business opportunities that he told her that she should be tracking down are people who had committed and been convicted of felonies who wanted a pardon. And Giuliani told her that they were selling pardons, him and Donald Trump, for $2 million each, and they were splitting the money 50-50. Now, that is an absolute echo of a story in the New York Times from 2 years ago, in which John Kiriakou, the former CIA officer who was convicted of, I believe, spying or something close to it, but in any case, he was convicted. He was approached by Rudy Giuliani, who offered to get him a pardon for $2 million. And what he told Giuliani was, you know, all I'd get back is my government pension. He wasn't going to jail. All I get back is my government pension. That's probably worth about $700,000 throughout my lifetime. And you want me to pay $2 million for it? Even if I had $2 million, I wouldn't do it. So, but that was a story that was in the New York Times 2 years ago, that Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump together, between the two of them, that they were selling pardons. So this is not something new. And as far as I can tell, not a single elected Republican has commented on this story. Not one has condemned it. Why? Because corruption is now officially the Republican Party's brand. The ideals of America are, to these guys, really just nothing more than a joke. I mean, you've got Republicans running around going, oh my God, Hunter Biden made $10 million while he was working for Burisma and doing this and doing that. Well, Jared and Ivanka made $640 million while they were in the White House. And Hunter was never in the White House. He was never an advisor to the president. They had formal positions. And then, you know, according to several reports, Jared sold intelligence, U.S. intelligence, to Mohammed bin Salman that he used then to overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia and declare himself the leader. And he's been paid $2 billion for that. Donald Trump himself is taking what has been described as a huge amount of money from the Saudis for the so-called Live Golf Tournament. I mean, this is what the Republican Party has come to. They lack any core beliefs. They have no values at all, other than supporting right-wing billionaires, keeping their taxes low, and supporting the fossil fuel industry. I mean, if you look at the 315-page, Limit, Save, and Grow Act. This is the piece of legislation that Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans have proposed and put in Congress, saying that they'll raise the debt ceiling. 31 words. 31 words out of the 315 pages lift the debt ceiling. 275 of the 315 pages are dedicated exclusively to things the fossil fuel industry wants. That includes ending all the green energy provisions of and subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act, fast-tracking new fossil fuel infrastructure, reinstating the Keystone XL pipeline permits, blocking Joe Biden or any future president from banning fracking, and selling off federal lands for pennies on the dollar to drillers, to oil drillers and to coal miners. And that's just a little bit of it. I mean, virtually across the board, what we have is that, you know, Republicans are telling the rest of us to just go screw ourselves. They really don't care how many of our kids die from guns, or how many of our queer children die from suicide, or how many women die from pregnancies that are unwanted, or even just, you know, crisis-based. At the same time that Democrats are trying to reduce student debt, expand Medicaid coverage, strengthen Social Security and Medicare, expand coverage for food stamps and housing support, at that same time, Republicans are demanding deregulation for dirty industries and to make Donald Trump's tax cuts for billionaires permanent. This is just so wrong. This is, and where did all this come from? Well, basically it all goes back to the U.S. Supreme Court, to 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court, being led by Lewis Powell back in the day, this faction, nowadays being led by Clarence Thomas since the 1990s, basically just saying that we're going to change the rules. We're going to make it so that bribery is no longer a crime, at least when it comes to politicians. Now, if you try to bribe, you know, if you go to your local bank and say to the teller, "Hey, I'll give you $50 cash if you'll slip me a couple of $100 bills," or you know, if you go to an auto parts store and say, "Hey, leave a couple tires out back for me and I'll pick them up. Here's $200 cash." If you do that kind of bribery, you still go to jail. But if you say to a politician, I'll kick $1 million into your super PAC in exchange for that, I would very much like it if you would promote a tax cut for me, that's completely legal. I mean, you can't literally quite say it like that, but you could certainly do it like that. Thanks to 5 corrupt Republicans, now 6, on the Supreme Court, every single one of them. You got Leonard Leo, who parlayed his assembly line of hard right and neo-fascist judges into $1.65 billion. He was recently outed for what sure looks like a bribe to Ginny Thomas at the time that the Supreme Court was trying to decide what to do about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act, for goodness sakes. At that time, there was this group called the Judicial Education Project that had an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief before the court, demanding that the court gut the Voting Rights Act so that Republicans could start shutting down polling places in black neighborhoods, make it harder for black people to vote, throw black people off the voting rolls, all those kinds of things. And what do? Well, Leonard Leo has money, it looks like about $100,000 at least, from the Judicial Education Project, funneled through Kellyanne Conway's polling company, given directly to Ginny Thomas, with a note that says, make sure that Ginny Thomas's name is not associated with this. It sure looks like that, like it's a bribe to me. And guess what? Clarence Thomas did not recuse himself even after his wife took this money from this group that had one of the amicus briefs in this case. Instead, he was the tie-breaking vote to let Republicans go on a vote suppression, on a black voter suppression spree. I mean, since just that one decision, where it looks like Leonard Leo bribed Ginny and Clarence Thomas with $100,000, just since that one decision, Republican governors have shut down over 2,000 polling places in black and Hispanic neighborhoods. They have gerrymandered numerous black elected officials literally right out of existence, as elected officials. They have purged over 16 million mostly black and Hispanic votes from the voting rolls. And as a result of this, states that were purple, Texas, Georgia, Ohio, Florida, have now become bright red. You've got, states like Florida and Texas where they're arresting black voters. You got black voters who are terrified by this. And it's showing. You saw a drop of almost 1 million black voters in the last election in those 2 states as a result of this. And then, of course, billionaire Harlan Crow gets in on the act and, starts giving millions of dollars in freebies and gifts to Clarence Thomas. Sam Alito's taking speaking trips to Europe, luxury 5-star trips. Brett Beerbong Kavanaugh gets his debts and his house paid off. Amy Coney Barrett won't recuse herself from cases where her father's oil company, Shell Oil, is involved. John Roberts' wife earned over $10 million setting up law firms that argue before the Supreme Court, with lawyers that are friendly to the Robertses, essentially. Or at least that's how it appears. And a lot of this, all this money and all these gifts and favors that are being showered on these Supreme Court justices, David Sirota and Andrew Perez make the point that this is not to get specific outcomes. This isn't like just bribes. This is to keep them in the conservative circle. Republicans appointed, Dwight Eisenhower appointed Earl Warren to the Supreme Court. Earl Warren turned into a liberal. He appointed William Brennan to the Supreme Court. William Brennan turned into a liberal. John Paul Stevens was appointed to the Supreme Court, I believe, by Richard Nixon. He turned into a liberal. David Souter was appointed to the Supreme Court by George Herbert Walker Bush. He turned into a liberal. This is an effort to prevent that from ever happening again. Because once these judges have lifetime tenure, they can actually do the right thing, unless they've got billionaires pouring money on them. So here we have, and then you know, as a result of Citizens United, for example, you know, over $1 billion was poured into the 2022 election. Much of it actually just billionaires spent $1 billion in the 2022 election. And in just the 3 states where they elected Republicans, Ohio, North Carolina, Wisconsin, you know, J.D. Vance, Budd, and Johnson, Ron Johnson, quote, this is, you know, from Americans for Tax Fairness, quote, Republican billionaires outspent the much smaller pool of Democratic billionaires by at least 9-to-1 in each race. In each race. I mean, this is what Jimmy Carter was talking about when he was on this program about 5 years ago and said, under Citizens United, America has just become a place with unlimited political bribery. It's now an oligarchy rather than a democracy. We've got Nazi-aligned militias or Republican-aligned openly Nazi militias stalking our streets of our cities. You've got GOP donor Wall Street hedge funds could own as many as 40% of all rental homes in America by the end of this decade. Climate change is killing thousands of Americans every year. Working people can't buy food because the minimum wage hasn't been raised in forever. The rights of women are under attack in state after state. Our kids are dying in an epidemic of suicide in the hands of massive, unregulated, Republican-leaning social media companies. When do we say the Republican Party has killed America? What say you?